Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Yumon Sang, who is the CEO and co-founder of Churn Zero. Hi, Yumon. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, sir. You're very welcome. Now, Yumon, for the listeners that are not familiar with you and your work, particularly around Churn Zero, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you get up to?
Yeah. So I'm a repeat entrepreneur and focusing on generally building businesses in very new verticals. And I was early to things like marketing analytics, marketing automation, B2B social media. And now I'm focused on customer success with my current company, Churn Zero. And at Churn Zero, we sell to other B2B companies who have, who really want great customer success teams. And we help them with a platform to manage that team.
Awesome. So the reason I wanted to have a chat to you is because, I've talked to a bunch of people about customer success, and I always bang on about retention and loyalty and all those different things. But I know that we're at the time of recording, we're in let's say a challenging economic environment with high inflation, kind of rising interest rates, supply chain kind of problems, commodity shortages, all these different sort of things. And people are talking about potential recession, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wanted to revisit customer success and its value. And also I wanted to talk to somebody like yourself who's been through a bunch of these times before, navigating .com kind of boom and bust, which I remember, which was all quite interesting. Mm-hmm. Things like 9/11, the Great Recession that we went through, kind of and then most recently sort of the COVID pandemic. And I wanted just to kind of get your, I guess, macro view on what companies should be doing right now to focus on and engender their customer success.
Yeah, it is weird. I mean, it's every downturn seems to have its own sort of set of weirdnesses, right? And you really can't, you really don't understand what's going to happen. So I would say you got to focus on two things, right? During these times, I would say the most important is just to be agile. I think, and you'll hear me come and talk about the agile companies a lot, because I think in this new day and age, that's really what it means to be a great company. But with specific to customer success, generally in good times, like a lot of investments that a company makes is really focused on new sales, right? Mm-hmm. But even in good times, studies will show that it's about 5 to 7 times more costly to acquire a new customer as it is to keep one, right? So we've heard that. Now, when it gets rough, right, the downturn, that 5x multiple probably expands even more, right? Mm-hmm. New leads slow, win rates narrow, deals take longer to close. And of course, retention rates will also suffer a little bit. But in a downturn, as a CEO, I'm going to try to find every dollar of investment that has the best leverage, right? So where am I going to spend the money that I have less of to those places where I have the greatest leverage? Mm. And in a downturn, that leverage advantage moves even more to customer retention. And so, specifically, if you need to do something right now, this summer, like we're talking in July, what should I focus on? I would say, think about probably the main reason why your customers will churn in this day and age, right? Is it because of budget? Is it because, what are those reasons? Like name the top 1, 2, 3 reasons and create the proper repeatable plays to react ahead of it, and certainly react when you were told that these issues are coming, right? And I think for different companies, it's different problems, but focus on the top 2 or 3 that's important to you, and make sure that you have repeatable plays to react to them as quickly as possible.
I mean, that's great advice. I mean, however, to be fair, we've heard a lot of that before, and yet many kind of companies don't get out of their own way, and many will try and sell their way out of kind of problems, even in kind of downturns. And that's not to say there's not a place for that, but they forget about it's find it hard to build those retention and loyalty and success kind of behaviors. I mean, wonder, do you have any personal examples, given that you've gone through this cycle before, of past successes in a downturn where companies have either pivoted or been agile, just going, we need to respond to this, to almost like to show people like this is kind of what happens when you do this sort of stuff.
Right. Well, we did turn to COVID, right? So COVID, we're still at the back end of COVID, but when COVID happened, but just a little more than 2 years ago, remember the first 2 months, it was like, what is going to happen? I mean, the uncertainty was beyond anything, we've ever seen. And so, the most agile companies that we worked with basically said, hey, I'll give you an example. We have a company called, a customer called Untapped, and they work with restaurants and breweries. And of course, 2 interesting things. They actually saw the shutdown coming from Asia, moving to Europe and then moving to the US, because they had customers there and they were using our system to track what they were doing. And they saw that customers were shutting down their usage in Asia first, moving into Europe, and then moving in the US. And so they knew that they had to act quickly. So one of the things they did was they said, hey, instead of churning, why don't they put in a pause program, right? To pause your subscription, right? Because they knew that they were getting hit the worst. The hospitality was getting hit the worst. A lot of them were micro businesses. So let's pause their subscription now, right? So for them, the most important thing was these companies, their customers were likely to go out of business or not exist. Okay. And that's what their worry was. And so they were trying to cut every cost they can. So Untapped, our customer, knew that. And for them, it's like, okay, why don't we pause, right? So, let you live to fight another month, another day, another quarter, and see what happens, right? And then, of course, when people started reopening, they also saw that happening, right? And it's like, okay, great. What can we do to, help you with other things like curbside pickup, right? With touchless menus. Yeah. And so they, being agile in those things was just really important for them to save their customers and continue to grow.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was also this idea is that we know when things tighten, and this was the focus on proving ROI on these kind of new initiatives or new decisions, as it were, kind of just goes up. And increasingly over the last kind of few years, we've seen the scrutiny on anything that falls into that service and experience sort of space. The scrutiny on those initiatives has gone up, and so what sort of metrics should success professionals or experienced professionals be looking to in order to prove the ROI and manage kind of the shareholders and investors' kind of expectations and prove the ROI?
Really, the great news, great question. The great news for customer success is that you can actually calculate ROI. By the way, I've been in businesses, and one of the things I learned as an entrepreneur is there are people you sell to, buyers, who, they cannot prove ROI because it's a soft, it's softer, right? And those are under the most pressure during downturns. Customer success folks can prove ROI, and how do you do it? It's net revenue retention, right? You are holding the revenue for a customer. And so you know that if you want to improve net revenue retention, NRR, by 1%, say, you know what the benefit of that is, right? And so if you're saying that I want to invest X amount of money to get 1% of NRR, you can do the ROI calculation very, very easily. Now, I think that's not the problem for CS people, to be frank. I think doing the ROI is straightforward. I think they have the ability to do it. Very, very lucky to be able to do that because, like I said, not everyone gets to do that. I think the challenge for CS is actually having the confidence to say it and make the ask.
Right.
And so if you compare CS, which is also relatively a new department, to sort of more established departments like sales, right, and marketing, I would say a typical sales leader or typical marketing leader will come in much more confidently with an ROI sell to a CEO, right? Because they've done it, right? And they've done it a few times and they've seen it work. And they're like, a salesperson say, hey, if you let me invest in, say marketing automation or sales automation, I'm going to get, I'm going to close at a 1% higher close rate. And therefore it's going to be this. And they're going to say this with huge confidence. And CS, they're just still new enough, even though they have the ROI argument, their challenge is making the ask with the level of confidence, that they need in order to get the projects approved.
And I've got a list of questions kind of like I wanted to ask you. So maybe I want to jump forward a little bit because is that why you think it's important for customer success teams to be thought of as revenue driving teams and not just kind of like happiness or satisfaction sort of like teams, because it has to be it has to be demonstrable?
I think there's two reasons, why you want to be a revenue team and rather than a happiness team. One is really, happiness doesn't always lead to, the business success, right? It can, but it certainly isn't the driver to, business success, right? Driving revenue is the driver. So one, let's actually get to the point, like, what is the most important for the business? And that is increasing revenue. The other thing is you always want to be a revenue center, not a cost center, right? So if CS is known as a cost center, okay, guess what? And so I'm the CEO of a company. My reaction to all cost center is to minimize costs. And then my reaction to all revenue center is to maximize revenue, right? So which side would you rather be on? So if your happiness, that's probably more of a cost. I'm going to want to minimize, and just minimize and sort of optimize all that. And then, have the budgets be smaller, do more with less. And then of course, with revenue, I want to invest and get more out of that. So, those are probably the two reasons. One is that's where it counts. But two, from a sort of investment point of view, you always want to be a revenue center, not a cost center.
Which is sort of the perennial problem that, say, contact centers or customer service, customer helps, customer support teams, whether that's in a small team or, or in a large kind of contact center or whatever, is they're generally seen as being cost centers, even though they have incredible amounts of value and insight and data and expertise and all these different sort of things. And so becomes still is the perennial challenge for many of those teams.
That's exactly right. I mean, for customer support being a cost center, right? They can still be excellent, right? In fact, they have to be excellent. But part of their excellence is really, how little you can spend to be excellent, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely a challenge.
So what sort of things, I mean, I guess I'm thinking about it. It's like we're getting to the point where we can see things are going to tighten, and we don't know how long for, how much, and sort of stuff. But we know that there's a lot of shifting plates kind of here. But what I wanted to understand is if we actually were to almost really switch in and lean into the whole customer success approach. I mean, and what sort of like things should we be doing? What sort of strategies should we be implementing? Like now, what should we be doing right now? And do they differ from kind of more long-term sort of plays?
Yeah. So so let's just talk maybe specifically about the downturn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in the immediate future, right, the agility is really about like, what's this downturn all about, right? And which sectors will it affect? And how would it affect specifically the product and service that you're doing? So there's a sort of a moment in time right now, like what's the nature of this event, and how's it going to affect it? And so, for instance, COVID, was affecting certain verticals a different way than other verticals. So you had to be agile for this one. This one maybe is more inflation jobs. It could be supply chain, right? So you have to figure out, very specifically which verticals are going to matter. So, so basically you want to mitigate churn in the short term, right? There's people who will have panic churn right now. How do who's going to panic churn and how do you deal with that? It's probably, your first move. Always a long-term move, right? If you don't do this already, you always want to focus on adoption, right? So I always am a big fan of like, okay, make sure that, when you think about your customers, always in the long term, are they adopting the product and service that you are offering? Are they getting good value out of it? Are they getting good use out of it? Now, usually usage and value are somewhat related, but not always. But adoption, usage, you can see, right? Okay, are they in there? Are they taking advantage of everything that we're offering them? If you focus on that, it often will lead to value. If it doesn't lead to value, then you have a product problem, right? And CS can be helpful. But if you have a good product, adoption will lead to value. And in the long term, you always want to focus on that in good and bad times, right? But, I would say in the long term, I always suggest adoption.
I mean, I think that, and that's where some of the more mature, if you like, setups have CS linked in with kind of product and that whole development sort of cycle, because they're seeing and hearing things right on the front line, and and then you can loop it back in, and then it's almost that it becomes part of that ongoing data analytics, feedback, insight, action conversation. And that's where the more mature players get to.
I agree. I would actually say that the startups and most mature companies do that really well, right? And that is, and what I mean by really well is that customer success and product are very aligned, right? So either you've gotten there and you're just a great company, or in the beginning, like you just sit across from each other, right? You're all in a room, you're on the same Slack call every single day. And so, you are by nature together. It's sort of that middle part where you start to scale, where you start to deviate. And if you don't get back on track, right, with good integration, then you're not going to be a great company.
Yeah. I mean, but also, because I know that kind of customer success is that, so economic conditions affect everybody, and customer success is traditionally, historically, and I guess more commonly is associated with the whole SaaS space and subscription software as a service and subscription products. But I also know you're a big advocate for customer success to be applied and implemented across kind of like the business kind of landscape. I mean, why is that? I mean, is customer success applicable to all firms?
I think, customer success, maybe I'll back up and say, if you're in the business of selling, if repeatable transactions, right? If you have repeatable transactions in any way, and for that is, subscription, of course, a repeatable transaction. Even restaurants, right, is loyalty, right? It's repeatable, repeating transactions. Even Amazon, right, in many ways is like, repeating transactions. They're not subscription, but you want to make sure that you're delivering the best customer experience so they come back over and over and over again, right? So, customer success is really, customer success, customer experience, right? In both sort of, one generally refers to B2C companies, one generally prefers to B2B companies, but they're essentially doing the same. Am I delivering a great experience for you as a customer, that you're getting value and you love to do business with us so that you keep doing business with us? So if you describe customer success in that way, of course, every company needs to do that, right? Probably the only companies that don't need, I don't know, I'm even hard pressed to say, is there a company that doesn't need that? I think what's new is the proactiveness of customer success versus, There's some that, if you build it and it's great, they'll keep using your product without any help. I would say for the majority of companies, right, it really is, having a team that makes, that sort of tracks, how's a customer doing and making sure they're getting the proper usage. And customer success is more B2B, sort of maybe higher value deals now, right? Just because that's where you can make the investment, and that's where a person can help. Mm-hmm. But the strategies and the thoughts, certainly can go down. Like many of our customers are getting $30 a month from their customers, right? So mm-hmm. That's not that. They still call it customer success, and most of it's probably automated. In fact, the vast majority of it is automated, but it's still customer success. It's still applicable, and it's still worth the investment, right? And so if you just keep, pushing those concepts, you can imagine every company requiring this in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's about. I like the point around being proactive, and I think that's a notion that's been talked about in service and experience for such a long time. And many companies have struggled to deliver it because they were almost like waiting for the data and the technology to do the work for them, rather than just getting their heads together and go, what did we learn about these existing customers, these old customers, that we can then apply to some of the journey of some of the new ones to allow them to navigate problems that we know are naturally going to come up, and yet do it sort of organically rather than waiting for the technology to kind of, to show up to be able to facilitate that, if you know what I mean.
I think you bring up, one point I'll add to it. Basically, yeah, expecting some magic box to happen and to fix things, right? People sort of turn on Netflix, and Netflix is fully automated, and their thing is if I'm adding things to my queue to watch, right, I'm going to be, a happy customer. And so that's all automated, and everybody mm-hmm. wants that. But in reality, right, it's really making probably manual investments up front, right, and understanding your customers and trying to automate things as you've sort of figured it out, right? So there is a process for, you hate to automate things that you don't really know works. Like I say that's number one. A lot of folks who are really, really new to CS, they're trying to automate all their playbooks up front based on a hunch. Mm-hmm. Well, then you just automate something that really maybe works or maybe doesn't. It can be rough. So I think the human element is always important.
Yeah. So to bring this to sort of life, tell me a bit about Churn Zero and some of the brands that you work with, and kind of how they've been able to insert kind of the whole customer success approach and mindset, and also your kind of platform into what they're doing, what problems it allowed them to solve, and how they've kind of benefited, because it'll bring this all sort of to life, as it were.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about one customer with one specific use case, right? Because really is a great customer success department really has 5 or 6 things they're trying to do really, really well during their customer lifecycle process, but it's really, doing doing them one at a time. So we have a customer called HackerRank, and it's a very high velocity business, right? So they work with programmers and companies that service them. And so there's just a lot of people who are using their product. They use us to focus. One of the things they use us for is focus on their most at-risk customers. Right? Mm-hmm. These are the customers that in the past will churn at an extremely high rate. So what can we do about that? The one thing about using Churn Zero is that we give you visibility on the at-risk customers, and in the past they were treating them probably all the same, right? It's like, okay, how can we help, or make sure you're doing A, B, and C. But in fact, if you just put a little bit of data in there, you can basically find, say, the 5 different types of folks who are at risk, and then actually be focused on those 5 different types, right? Maybe some of them had bad onboarding. Maybe some of them, were logging in, but they weren't using the high value features. Maybe some of them were missold, right? And they had they had sort of outsized expectation.
Mm.
And just by knowing those things, right, at volume and scale, and with good data, you can really have very specific next steps for the customer and CSM. I mean, this is a very simple example, but the thing I see about CS is that unsophisticated CS firms bring hammers to every problem, right? But in fact, you really want to know what tool to use. So they were able to actually reduce churn in this at-risk cohort by 50%, just by adding some data, automated plays, and be very specific about what they do for each customer type who was at risk. So great thing to do, right? It was a big problem for them, but they didn't really have a great way to do it. And then using our product, they were able to have that focus and make a real impact.
And how were they able to identify the at risk? Because the 50% reduction in, if you like, in the churn of at risk customers is like a significant number.
Right.
I mean, but how did you get to the kind of point where you knew they were at risk? I mean, did you have to develop a health score, or do you have to need longitudinal data that you can then kind of figure out kind of there's some different factors, and therefore if this happens and this happens, it's happened, therefore X?
So the things that you use is often, some of it's time based, right? Like by week 1 or by week 2, by week 4, these things have to happen, or else we know you're at risk, right? Okay. So maybe it's your first login, or that you need to create a profile for your company. There's very specific things that are very unique to all the customers to say, hey, look, if you're not doing these things by this date, you're in trouble. And actually, oftentimes CS teams don't have information to that, don't have access to that information. Or if they do have access to that information, it's kind of stuck over here. And then, things are stuck over, other information stuck over here. So it's actually very hard for them to get it. They can get it, but they just don't have the operational resources to make it happen, right? So when you bring it together in a platform, it's right there, right? So some of it is time-based, do these things by this time. So we track usage, right? We track, tenure. We'll even do surveys to see, how you're going. We'll track your implementation and where you are in your implementation. And if any of those things go haywire, and they'll go haywire in very unique ways, you can create very unique plays to, here's a failed onboarding plan. Here's a lack of sort of high value usage plan. Here's an oversold plan, right? These are things you can create with the data if you have that data.
And is it all kind of like, is that all kind of, I mean, because I'm really interested in, and imagine they've got a company and they've got, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands of customers. And it's sort of hard to keep track of that if you're like because most CS teams are not huge.
Right.
They're asked to take on a lot with kind of sophisticated technology and limited resources. And I guess so there must be a lot of stuff that's kind of automated in there, but is that built on do they have to build their own sort of like almost like archetype? This is what a healthy customer looks like, and this is kind of what an unhealthy, and then it's like a spectrum, and you're almost getting graded in terms of where you are versus kind of where you are in your journey, as it were. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So I think there's, the easiest way to think about it is there are sort of health scores you can create, using these systems, right? And in general, we actually encourage our customers to create, you can have a health score that really tracks a lot of data, the state of relationship. Are they coming to your meetings? Did they complete your training? Are they using your product? Right? Did they give you a good NPS score? They can actually roll up into a very, robust health score, right? So that's the simplest thing, right? Is like actually taking a lot of pieces of data and then rolling it up into a healthy, unhealthy, or okay, red, yellow, green. But people can have different shades of yellow, right? I can be yellow and like, hey, I'm using your product, but I really don't like it, or like I like you, but I'm not using your product, right? So those are yellow, and those are very different moves.
Sure.
And so you can then say, hey, show me all my, at risk or yellow customers, and then depending on why they're yellow, like, this is the play I'm going to run here. This is a different play I'm going to run for this situation. And then you can, of course, do that for red, and you can, and generally even do that for green, right? You can have someone who's green and is this one's a green and an upsell opportunity, right? This one's a green, but they're not really an upsell opportunity tonight. And then you'll behave differently for those as well. Yeah, so it's really the health score is always useful, but then there's always a nuance that has to happen on top of that.
I guess that's the kind of the balance of the kind of the human insight and relationship insight with the kind of the use of technology.
Although I'll tell you that we do ask, I think the best practice is to make sure the CSM chimes in with what he or she believes to be, the state of the customer relationship. But that state of customer relationship can be automated through clues like NPS, engagement, right? License utilization, right? So they could tell you like, oh, everything's great. But then if everything else is saying it's not so great, you really need to know both, right?
Yeah. And so I wanted to just kind of like to zoom out a little bit and ask you some general questions. But before I do that, I want to say, is there anything that you wanted to sort of to highlight before we can like move on and do that zooming out, as it were?
Probably the only thing I would say is customer success is a great career if you are looking to get into tech. It's been one of the fastest growing careers on LinkedIn, and if you're lucky, right, and get training, you'll be at the sort of intersection of delivering good service and also delivering commercial success, right? So that combination of customer focus and commercial focus, that's going to lead to a great career, right? So any of your listeners who are sort of like, hey, how do I, where should I invest my time? If you have any inkling, CS is a great career. So I would encourage them to get focused on that.
Awesome. Thank you. So I know that all right. So I said we wanted to zoom out a little bit. Now I know we mentioned it before, we are emerging from a couple of years worth of fraught with kind of pandemic COVID-19 challenges, and it feels like we're on the back end of that. And we've emerged into a space where there's a whole bunch of other challenges, and that success and retention and loyalty seem to be the thing that's kind of rising up the agenda. But what I wanted to ask you is that what other challenges, based on what we've learned over the last kind of couple of years, do you think that are lying ahead that we need to be sort of mindful kind of? Yeah.
So, I would say from the pandemic going forward, the one thing I'm planning for, right, is the impact of remote work on building a company, right? It gives you a lot of advantages, right? Talent acquisition is way more interesting and way better, actually, I would say. But remote work, right, is tough. There's some people who believe, that the increase in employee churn, right, over the last 2 years will be systemic, right? Like it's what you can expect from here on out, right? Because, all I have to do is log off of one Zoom and log into a new Zoom, and boom, I'm in a new company, right? I mean, it's as simple as that.
Sure.
And so I think companies, have to sort of plan for an increased employee churn no matter what you do, right? So the best companies will go from 5% employee churn to 10% employee churn. And maybe companies that have experienced a lot of churn will go from 30% to, 50% churn. You just have to step up to that, right? And find a better way to be best at onboarding, find a way to create a great culture of a Zoom and Slack, right? That feels different from the next. To me, I think that's really the key challenge from the pandemic. That's number one, right? It's really just the employee set. And then look, the one thing I've always felt this about a company, but agility is now so important, right? And you just think about the months that we spent dealing with the pandemic. It was complete chaos. What's going to happen to all of us, right? To like, okay, we're getting, okay, now when's the vaccine coming? To okay, well, even though we all vaccinated, new variants came along, right? And you're opening and you're closing and you're opening and you're trying, like, do I keep my office? Do I not keep my office? And so, sort of the days of planning 18 to 36 months ahead, but how you're going to grow your company feels like you don't have that time, right? And so, just being able to react quickly to what's happening right now, I think is important.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know. I mean, it's something that that I've always said is that I've said a number of times is that the problem is that when people talk about being agile, I mean, I completely get what you're going to say, but there's a difference between. I mean, it's about being truly agile. It's not about a process. It's about a mindset and an approach.
It's a mindset.
Willing to try things and to try things out and to learn from them and to go again and things. And so it's like I've seen too many people or heard too many people kind of, when you talk about agile, they talk about, it's scrums and sprints and stand-ups. And,
That's right.
And you're like going, oh my God, you're just being such a tool head. And it's so reductive.
I will say another thing, actually, by the way, agile doesn't mean, moving. So, I'm learning how to actually drive a boat. Okay. And I'm not sure this is a great analogy. So boaters don't, I may be really wrong on this, but it feels like, what, I have a better analogy. It's actually driving on ice, right? And driving on ice is better to make small moves quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Right, rather than big moves quickly, right? And so being agile, I think, is making small moves quickly rather than big moves quickly. And I'll give you an example, right? When COVID came down, we had a few people who said, lay off half your company right now, like right this very second. And we said, no, we're, in our case, we had good unit economics, right? We were, we were growing quickly and everything looked good. So we just stopped hiring, right? And then actually when COVID, after a few months, we were back on growing. And the same people who told us, why didn't, how about cutting half? They actually said, well, what if you had actually kept hiring? Wouldn't that have been really incredible, right? And so, these are people who are like yanking the steering wheel left and right on ice, and that's a bad thing, right? And so small moves quickly, I think, is really important for agility. That's how I think about agility.
Nice. I mean, it's good advice. I mean, and it's a bit like I like that analogy, sort of like driving on ice. But if I was also going to ask you on that, you've been round this roundabout, although you don't really have roundabouts in the States, but you know what I mean, I think. You've been around this roundabout kind of a number of times before. And so if I was to ask you to boil it down, thinking about kind of what's coming, thinking about the challenges that we're facing, thinking about that the whole creating kind of improving your net revenue retention, as it were. You had to boil it down, and you said, and I've said to you, what would be your best advice to somebody listening to this that's in that CS space that wants to drive that NRR? What would it be?
Yeah, if I were to give one advice, right, at all levels, right, sophisticated, unsophisticated, new, I would say be transparent with your metrics and your stories, right, and use them, right? So use your metrics, use the stories, and be transparent about them. When people ask me, hey, we don't really have a customer-centric company, what do you do? Like, well, then start telling the stories, right? Start sharing every NPS score, right? Every comment that people have, right? Because really just getting that information out there, just getting it out there is important. And then using it effectively is number two. So just one piece of advice: be transparent with your metrics and your stories. Will go a long way. You can never do enough of it, and it will always help your company.
Yeah. I mean, I heard somebody characterize that perfectly, and I can't remember who it was, but I'm not going to claim it. But they said, data informs people, but stories move people.
It's true. It's true. You need both. You need both.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And so I love that. So thank you for that. Before we go, I have a couple of questions I want to ask. First set is about my ongoing kind of research. I'm gathering words and stuff around this punk thing. I was explaining to you before we started that I wrote this book called Punk CX back in 2019, and I've been gathering all these words, like big, almost like a word cloud of words, and to get different people's perspective on what taking a punk approach to customer experience or customer success would look like. So, Yuma, what one or maybe two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to CS, let's say?
That's a great question. By the way, I love your punk approach. I think you have to be bold and kind of offbeat in order to make a big splash. I'm going to take that punk and make it a corporate word. Okay. And it's C-level, right? C-level.
Okay.
And so, I think every CX person, every CS person, these are new, you're generally new departments. You just have to feel good and confident to know that you belong on the C-level, right? As a leader of CX or CS, and that you have to have that type of conversation with your peers. And that not only do you belong, you have to act it, and you have to do everything you can, to make this a C-level type of impact. So that's my word, C-level.
C-level. Can I add?
Is that a word?
Well,
no,
it's fine. We'll have it there.
Okay.
Can I take the add-in one that you kind of said before? Because you said bold and offbeat. I think we've had bold, but offbeat I like, because it's almost a bit like where most people are doing this, then sometimes you need to kind of do that. And
that's right. That's what punk is, right? I mean, punk is it's like a great, punk music it surprises you, and it's in your face a bit. It's a little offbeat, and it makes a difference.
So
please use it.
I'm going to kind of use that one as well. And so the second one is, the follow-up bit was a bit called Punk XL, and it talks about experienced leadership and how, to be successful, we've got to take a more of a holistic, integrated, systemic sort of view of experience and what it takes to deliver that. And I've been asking people for their sort of examples of brands or organizations that they hold out as being, if you like, experienced leaders, the ones that are like setting the bar and keep setting the bar and raising the bar for everybody else. Who would you use as an example of an experienced leader?
I'll talk about a customer that we have who we just keep, and I imagine your audience will not know them. It's a company called Red Canary. They're in the cybersecurity space. And every time we talk with them, like, they're doing all the right things to have, a state-of-the-art customer success team. Now, in the end, like, you think about what it means, right? It's making the right investments in people, software, operations, enablement, right? In order to have a scalable CS team. And when we talk to them all the time, they're really pushing the edge on those investments. And I always like to use an analogy where, sales has been around for so long, and that, they generally have good investments in all those things I've just spoken about. And CS just simply do not, right? They don't know to ask for it. If they ask for it, they're not confident about it. If they're not confident about it, then no one's going to give it to them. And so Red Canary is an example. They have well-defined, well-rounded processes with good data to work with, and then where the customers are unforgiving in cybersecurity, and they've done that by investing in all parts of customer success, right? So something as simple as that, I think, needs to be lauded, and something that all of us should be doing.
Awesome. I have never heard of them, but you've given us somebody else to look out for. So that's brilliant. So thank you for that. That's, it's always good to add to the rogues gallery, if you like. So people can look at those. But one final thing, Yuman, before we can go, is that, I think we could probably all agree, we watch the news and the world's an odd place. And, I've been wanted to end these conversations on a positive note. And so I wonder if you could share with me, what do you think is the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing you've seen in the last week?
The most interesting, of course, is all the new photographs from space. But
right.
I'm actually going to go really local.
Okay.
So positive and local. So I live in the Washington, D.C. area in the United States. And in the last week, I've been reading a lot about the city's plans to really invest in alternative ways of transportation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So walking, biking, scooters. If you ever come to DC, you're just you see this. It's been a car-oriented city, but in the last 5 years, and over the next 10, it's going to really morph into multiple ways of transportation that are less impactful to the city. And I'm thrilled with that. I'm a big walker, I'm a big biker. I love taking public transportation, and Washington D.C. is really stepping into that and making the investment. So it's very local, but it makes me feel really good about the state of cities in the United States and all over the world. And if DC is doing it, everyone else can do it as well.
Awesome. I like it. It's also kind of just different, right? This is kind of just an interesting kind of like positive thing. So thank you for that. So Yuman, that's all I have for today. I wanted just to say thank you for sharing your extensive experience over kind of the ups and downs of modern economies kind of with us and how to kind of like to survive those. Congratulations on the success that you've had so far with Churn Zero and your clients. And thank you so much for spending some time with me today. That's been awesome.
Yeah, it's been great speaking with you, and congratulations to building a great audience. So thanks for having me.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.